This is High School Not So Much a Musical, a podcast that takes you on a ride through the peaks and valleys of a high school journey. Here are your presenters, Nitin Jaladanki and Ayush Agarwal.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of High School Not So Much Musical. Today, we're joined by Mr. Tom Pike, who has been involved in the education sector heavily over the past couple decades. He's been involved as a counselor, as a professor at colleges, and recently has launched his own startup called Jump Education. So, Mr. Pike, if you could talk about your career in education over the past couple decades and give the listeners an understanding of what you've done, that'd be great.
Thanks, Ayush. First of all, thanks a lot for inviting me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. So basically I started in higher education about 20 years ago. Prior to that, I actually was living near where you live. I was living in San Francisco and was a member of the Pacific Stock Exchange and was a market maker on the options floor. And so I did that for about 12 years until I was about 40. And at that point, I had made enough money and kind of matured to a point where I realized I wanted to kind of give back rather than just making money for myself, and had been continually interested in psychology and mental health and my own kind of personal discovery journey for most of my adult life. And so I decided I'd go back to get a master's degree in counseling psychology. And I went into New Hampshire to Antioch, New England Graduate School and got a master's in counseling psychology. And I did some internships during that program. One of them was a year-long internship at the University of New Hampshire. And I actually didn't think I was gonna maybe even like working in the higher education environment all that much. And I found actually that I loved it. And so I worked as an intern there at the university. And then they hired me afterwards as a full-time counselor. So I was providing mental health counseling predominantly there, not teaching, not doing any kind of career or academic advising, but just focused on groups and individual mental health services. And then my wife and I also got married late in life. I didn't get married till I was like 42. And then we were living in Vermont. I was commuting to the university, and we decided to move to Oregon. I was from the West and wanted to raise our kids out here. We have 2 boys. And so when we moved out here, I noticed there was a community college in Southern Oregon near where we live, and they were looking for a counselor. So I applied for that job. Actually, my wife kind of kicked me out of the house. She said, "You know what, Tom?" I'd been fixing up our house for a couple of years, and we'd bought a 100-year-old house. So I love building things and fixing things. So I was working on the house, and she was like, "Maybe you should go get a job." So I applied for this counseling job at Rogue Community College and have been there for 13 years, predominantly doing mental health counseling, but also doing some instruction. Every term I teach scholar success courses. I teach study skills for math success. And I also developed a course on my own financial literacy for community college students. So I do some teaching like that, and I also provide career counseling and some academic advising during peak times during the term. So I've been doing that for 13 years, and it's kind of funny. I make like 1/10 of the money I made at the options floor, and I love my job 10 times more because I think it's also a stage of life thing. I think as I matured, I realized I wanted to give back, and I wanted to help people, and I love people and find everybody pretty fascinating. So I've been doing that for 13 years, and it's been great. So I think we'll get in a little bit farther. I don't know if you have any questions about that at all at this point.
Yeah, so one of the questions that I had was, Ayush and I are very, very into like finance and business and that side of things. So just before we quickly get into Jump Education, could you just talk about your experience with on the options floor and what exactly it is for anybody who doesn't know, and just how exactly you went from the options floor to wanting to do education and get into the education sector?
Absolutely, Nitin. Yeah, thanks for asking. The options floor, when I was in college, I fell in love with geology. Actually, I love the history of the earth and the fossil record and kind of everything geology oriented. So I was kind of studying that as my passion in college. But I'd also, my parents said, hey, business is a pretty good, well-rounded thing to be studying as well. And I'd done a lot of entrepreneurial stuff as a kid, buying and fixing up cars and selling them, and building furniture and boats and things. So I added business as a major as well. And I did an internship when I was in college on the Pacific Stock Exchange on the options trading floor, and actually kind of hated it. I was young. The trading pit is a pretty, it's safe to say it's a very competitive environment. And so there's a lot of kind of high emotion and a lot of people treating each other pretty poorly. There's a lot of kind of manipulative behavior, and psychologically, it's a pretty interesting place. And as a 20-year-old in college, it was a little bit overwhelming for me. And so I did a 6-month internship there. I learned a lot. I was basically kind of being what's called a clerk for a broker in the pit. So I was, just providing a broker in the pit kind of support services. And but then I thought, I'm never going to do that again. That was ridiculously hard. And but then a few years later, when I graduated college, I actually was a geologist for a couple of years. I traveled around the world a bit and worked on some interesting geological projects. And I realized over time that I really wanted to basically become a farmer. It's kind of a weird transformation, but from studying soil sciences and geology, I got really interested in soils and in organic agriculture, but I didn't have any money to buy a farm. And I didn't come from a family with money. My parents were teachers, and most of my siblings have been teachers as well. So the only place I could think about making enough money to buy a farm would be the options trading pit. So I had introduced my brother, who's a year older than me, into that environment. And he had made his way for the previous 5 years and become a very successful trader. So I went down there and worked as a broker. So in a trading pit, you have the liquidity is provided by the market makers. Most of them at that time were independent individuals, and they would, basically create the buying and selling prices for thousands of series of options. And the brokers are the ones who represent public and institutional orders in the pit. So I was a broker for a year to understand how the pit dynamics work and how the vocal outcry system works, where you yell and scream, prices and series of options and communicate in this kind of cryptic way. I learned the trading game as a broker working for a company representing public clients. And then once I got the pit dynamics down, I became a market maker, and that's kind of where the real money's at, where you're trading for your own account. And at that time you could, and it probably is, the trading game has changed over the years because of computerized trading and things. But back then you could, say put $25,000 or $50,000 in your account, and your clearing firm, which is sort of a bank in sorts, would allow you to leverage that to, 10, 20, $30 million. So there was extreme leverage available. And so the trading pit, basically, my advantage down there was I and my brother just happened to be kind of physiologically very quick to respond to people's outcries. So if I'm a market maker in the pit and a broker walks into the pit, there's maybe 50 or 100 market makers in any certain pit. A broker walks in representing an institution or a public client, and they say, maybe they want to buy or sell, some Microsoft put or calls. They say kind of they'll say, how are the Microsoft 20, puts? And then whoever responds fastest and loudest with the best market, with the best prices, the broker is trained to identify, it's kind of funny, 50 people yelling at them. They have to pick, the broker picks out which 3 people were first, and he goes to the first person and says, I have 1,000 of these puts to buy. And that person gets to choose how large of the order he wants to do. So my brother and I were oftentimes first in the pit. So we, that was our advantage. And we were very good with, it's pretty elementary math. You know, the options pricing is all done with calculus. But in the pit, it's just a lot of quick fractional math, multiplying, dividing in your head that allows you to be really quick and make fast decisions. So it's a little bit confusing to explain. I don't know, you know, what your questions might be, but I was a market maker and provided liquidity in options trading pits in that way.
That's really interesting, especially considering that a lot of kids in our school are really interested into investing stocks, stuff like that. Like, for example, Nathan and I, along with a few other people, are participating in the Wharton Youth Global Investment Competition, which is some elaborate competition held by University of Pennsylvania every year, where you are essentially given a case study on specific investments and on specific investments that a person wants to make, and they give you a list of goals that person wants to achieve, and you have to make the most strategic investments to accomplish that person's goal, and then draft up like an 11-page report on why your strategy is, you know, unique compared to other investment strategies that other teams may have thought of. Excuse me.
Wow.
So if you could talk a little bit about, you know, the importance of learning these types of things, and specifically like how the education system can sometimes ignore that, right? Because the education system focuses a lot on preparing you for the workplace and getting a job, but it kind of ignores the other half of the equation, which is essentially figuring out, after you make the money from the job, what is the best way that you can either save it, put it in a bank, invest it into real estate, stocks, crypto, etc., and overall just utilize that money in a way that gets you the best long-term profit. So if you could talk a little bit about, you know, should the educational system include more of these types of life skills, like filing your taxes, making investments, stock market, etc., and how that can be accomplished? How can we prepare children in the future to be ready to make these types of personal finance decisions?
Right. Thanks, Ayush. Those are important questions. And first of all, that Wharton Youth Global Investing Competition sounds fascinating. And what a great way to kind of learn about investing strategies and how to really capitalize on you know, systems in place and trends. And right now, you know, when I go on walks with friends, I have friends that are, you know, highly involved in finance, and we're always just thinking like, you know, the rules of investing seem to have sort of gone out the window with the just vast expansion in wealth that's been created in the last 10 years through things like crypto. You know, the old kind of Warren Buffetts of our world who were value investors and became super rich. You know, it seems like, in a sense, value investing and the fundamentals of investing in that way are somehow irrelevant, you know, and we keep thinking that, well, you know, there has to be a correction, but we're also looking at an environment right now where there's so much wealth that's been created that is chasing, you know, for the most part, a limited pool of resources that, you know, it's what we're looking at is really just a hyperinflationary environment that all assets are going up, and it's hard to figure out how to value things. So it's interesting. I don't know what I would do in the Youth Global Investing Competition as far as figuring out, you know, sound investing strategies. So, but as far as education goes, and the lack of really financial literacy education in high school and certainly community college where I teach, and how that it does do a disservice to our youth. That's an important thing to address. I'm not sure, you know, it's interesting because like my college that I work at asked me, knowing that I had a financial background, to create a course on financial literacy because there wasn't one at our school. And I honestly thought, not many people are going to sign up for that. And so I said, sure, I'll create that course. But I kind of waited to see if people would sign up before I was going to spend hours and hours developing curriculum. And it took a term or two of advertising before anybody really signed up. And then people started signing up, and then it became quite popular. And so what I noticed were people in those courses knew nothing about financial literacy for the most part, and kept saying like that's one of the most important things that they were learning. Because you're right, if you're taught in school how to make your way in the world as far as a career, but then you're not taught about, the basics of financial literacy and investing, you're kind of at a deficit. So I think schools are, I don't know, like you go to school it sounds like a super unique, interesting, basic independent school there in Silicon Valley. Do they have, it sounds like they have financial literacy opportunities for you. Is that true?
Definitely, yeah. So we have we actually have a lot at our school, and we're quite grateful for it because it obviously exposes us to these things early. So I talked about the investment club, where like every week we learn about some new aspect of stocks. So we learn about, evaluations, different ratios, how to analyze like specific financials in the stock, how to use like the graph to project the stock's like long-term trajectory. And then Nathan and Rishi are part of another club called DECA. So that's more of a business-oriented club, but they do have a lot of aspects of personal finance embedded into it. For example,
I can quickly
DECA
go into
also
like an
has,
example.
yeah.
Yeah, so just to like capitalize on the DECA front, so DECA is probably one of the largest clubs at our school with over like, I would say 85 students competing. And essentially the opportunities are endless in DECA because in every single cluster that they have like 6 different clusters ranging from marketing to personal finance to entrepreneurship to business management. There's just so many different types of clusters, but each of those individual clusters has a lot to do with personal finance as a whole. Because I can give you one example. When I was doing a practice role play with one of the mentors in the club, the situation that they gave us was, how will this sports drink company finance their expansion into Europe? But that was a marketing role play. So all this like DECA and everything that we do kind of fosters that personal finance mindset. It's a very, very important one, because in one of the past podcasts, we actually talked with an investment advisor, and he said that not many schools have the opportunity to learn about, not many students have the opportunity to learn about personal finance. And it's very, very important because once you get into the real world, you're working with real money, and you won't have the time to develop those skills at that point. So that was just a quick way or a long way of saying, yeah, personal finance is very, very prevalent in our school at the moment.
Yeah, you guys are lucky. As you said, you feel lucky for that. It is lucky. And you're right. I mean, you make a really good point. When you get out of school and you might have you might be married and have kids and a full-time job, you don't have as much time on your plate to jump off into personal finance and things like that. So now's the time to be learning that for sure. I was fortunate. I didn't have it. I went to public schools in California that aren't known for being, anything worth writing home about. But my dad also was an educator, but he was very involved with business and financial newsletters. So I was lucky in that I read a lot of financial newsletters from like age 12 on, and kind of got introduced to the stock market and precious metals and business in general. So I kind of got it through him, but a lot of kids don't get it at all. So one of the things with Jump Education that we can get into later, this startup I'm creating, is we plan on having a very robust kind of financial literacy kind of educational piece embedded in the curriculum that we offer. So I think a lot of parents see the value in that, and yet a lot of schools aren't providing it. Unless you're going to like a really nice, private school like you guys are, then you get, it sounds like you're getting that really good exposure in it, which is fantastic. But the education system, I'm not sure, it's an interesting thing in public education anyway, with budget constraints and standardized testing. The curriculum focus over the last few decades has narrowed dramatically, and certainly the kind of extracurricular topics, and I think, regrettably, financial literacy would probably be in there as well, have gone to the wayside. So it's up to, families to be teaching their kids that. It's up to independent organizations like Jump Education to be doing it. Some schools are doing it. The course that I created at the Road Community College has been taken by a TRIO program, which is a federally funded program at our school. One of my friends runs that program and has an MBA. And so I gave him all my curriculum. I'm taking a year sabbatical right now. But I gave him my curriculum about 5 years ago, and he kind of took that course over and really built it into a good course for this school. So it's there's a lot of things in our educational system that are lacking, and that's certainly one of them.
Thank you, Mr. Pike, for your awesome thoughts on how the education system can be improved to utilize and incorporate more subjects that apply directly to a student's life in the future. For our listeners, make sure to check out our future episodes with Mr. Pike, which will be released next Friday and the Friday after that as well, as this is the first part of a 3-part series. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.
High School Not So Much a Musical is hosted by Ayush Agarwal and Nitin Jaladanki. Narration by Samhit Padala. Music from Louis Luang Relaxation Cafe, Tune Pocket, and Infraction. If you like the show, please recommend it to your friends and family. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.